All right, let's just take a moment, take a deep breath, and consider God's presence with us here tonight. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this chance to get together tonight. Thank you for the meal that we had and for the family that prepared it. You just bless us in so many ways, and we're very grateful for that. We ask that you send Chiara Badano to us tonight, Blessed Chiara, to help me say the things that I need to say about her life, but also to open the hearts and minds of everybody else who's hearing this so that they can take away some of the lessons from her life and apply it to their own. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. You heard me say Blessed Chiara. She's in your workbooks. I know you don't have them with you, but her information's on page 40 and 41 in there when you get the next chance to look at them. Plus, you guys are going to keep those, so you'll have all this information after this. But Chiara is an interesting almost saint. She's blessed, which means she's one step away from canonization. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But she would be almost indistinguishable from most of you guys right now. She was born in 1971, so a little bit, a while back, but not terribly, certainly within my lifetime and Steve's lifetime. But she was basically a normal teenager. And so, but she was born, she was the only child. Her parents, Ruggiero and Maria Teresa, had gotten married, but they were unable to have children. And they prayed and prayed, and after 11 years of marriage, they finally conceived a child, and it was Chiara, whose name means brightness. It means bright. And so they realized that this was, a gift from God because they had been praying. And kind of like St. Philomena was the same way when we talked about her. Her parents couldn't have children, and suddenly they could when they were praying to God. And so she was born in a place called Sassoletto, Italy, which is kind of in northwestern Italy, kind of up towards France a little bit, kind of between the cities of Genoa, which is on the coast, and Turin, which is inland. But it's just it's a small city, like a village, but it's very mountainous around there. It has very much an old Italian feel to it. But like I said, she was, they realized that they had this gift from God, and so they really, they were very Catholic, and so they really, they took her to church and they raised her in the faith. But even from a young age, they realized that she had some unique qualities. So for one, when she was 4 years old, she was playing in her bedroom, and her mom went in and said, "My Chiara, you have a lot of toys here." And Chiara's like, "Yep, they're all mine." And she said, "Boy, wouldn't it be nice to give some of these to some poor kids?" And Chiara was like, "No, they're my toys." And she's like, "Okay." So her mom leaves, and a little while later, she hears her in her bedroom going, "Yes for this one, no for that one, yes for this one." And then she comes out and asks her mom for a bag. And so she had split up her toys, and she was going to give a bunch of her toys to poor kids. But she took all the new toys and put them in the bag to give to the poor kids. And her mom said, "Well, these are the brand new toys. Don't you want to keep those for yourself?" And she said, "No, we don't want to give poor kids the old broken toys. We want to give them the nice new toys." So her mom thought that was interesting. It was a very adult way to look at things. But she, had a pretty normal childhood. She had a lot of friends. Like I said, you wouldn't be able to distinguish her from most elementary school kids. By the time she was 9, though, she met a friend on a train. Her and her family were going somewhere, and there was this other girl who was almost exactly her age, and they met, and they just became instant friends. And this other girl started telling her about this movement that she was a part of called the Focolare movement, which was a movement started right at the end of World War II, and really caught fire, especially in Europe. It was very popular in Europe at the time And it's basically, it's a Christian group. It was run by a woman named Chiara Lubick. And she, the key thing about this was unity. It was trying to bring people together in whatever way they could. So they worked with teens, but they also worked with families. And so Chiara really bought into this, and she really, really wanted to do this. In fact, she had her parents, but when she was 11 years old, she kind of dragged her parents to a large gathering of the Focolare, which was in Rome, which was, it would be like us driving to like Indianapolis. It's like a 6-hour drive, something like that, 6-8 hour drive. And they went to this thing where there's all these families gathered, and her dad really didn't want to go. He was a truck driver, and he was like, I'm already traveling a lot, I don't want to go. But at one point, Chiara's like, I'm kind of hungry. And so her dad's like, okay, we got to go find some food. And suddenly the people next to her gave a sandwich to her parents to give to Chiara, and somebody else gave a bottle of juice to her. And her dad especially was really taken aback at the generosity of these people. And so when they came home from this thing, they were all really impressed with what they saw, and they all took a lot of steps in their faith that weekend that they were there. And so, but like I said, Chiara, as she grew up, she was into sports. She played tennis. She was a big swimmer. She really loved going to the beach, there wasn't a beach in the city she was at, but when they would go down to like towards Genoa and those places, they would go to the beach. She loved swimming. She loved music. She would be singing all the time. She liked to listen to music on the radio. This is in the the late 70s, early 80s. So, but she really, really loved music. She was just, like I said, for all intents and purposes, just a normal teenager. But the things that she was learning in her faith were really impressing her. And she had said this one thing which I thought was real interesting. She said this when she was about 12, so younger than you guys are now. She said, I discovered the gospel. I was not an authentic Christian because I did not live it completely. Now I want to make this magnificent book the sole purpose of my life. And so she started reading her Bible, and she just started really studying it, and just really, especially, things where the New Testament was talking about Jesus. She really started developing a close relationship with Jesus. But, she didn't like shove it on people either. She would say things like, when she was with people, she says, I don't want to bring them, I don't want to tell them about Jesus. I want to be Jesus for them. I want to bring them Jesus. And so this really showed in the way she lived her life. She was really kind. She was always smiling, always happy. And everybody around her just kind of was gravitated towards this girl. And so, like I said, she wound up going off to another town to high school. I think the family kind of, they moved for a short time to this other town so she could go to high school there, because the town she was at either didn't have one or it wasn't very good. I don't know. It didn't really say. But, and she struggled a little bit in high school where, there was one class where she actually failed the class. And she, really struggled with the teacher, but eventually she realized that she just needed to kind of change her attitude about the class, and she prayed about it a lot, and realized that this was just going to be a challenge for her. And she went back the next semester, and she did much better. So it was all kind of her attitude towards things. When she was about 16, almost 17 years old, she was playing tennis one day, and all of a sudden she had this sharp pain in her shoulder. She just thought, well, I pulled something or whatever, but the pain wouldn't go away. They took her to the doctor, and the doctor said, we'll treat it like it's a sprain or something like that, or a rotator cuff. And but it just never got any better. And so they decided they were going to do a CAT scan, and they determined that she had a form of bone cancer. And it was metastasized in multiple places in her body, especially in her spine. So it didn't really say if the cancer was in her shoulder, if that was because the nerves in the spine were being affected, but it was pretty advanced at this point in time. It was also a rare form of bone cancer, and they said it was one of the most painful kinds of cancer that there is. And bone cancer in general is one that, when I hear people get bone cancer, you're just like, oh man, just pray for that person, because it's excruciatingly painful. And so she said, well, I'm young, I can beat this. And, they started working with doctors. They started on a program. They were going to do a surgery. It wasn't clear what the surgery was, whether they were going into her back and trying to see what they could do. But there was a big mass on her spine, and so it was going to be very difficult to do anything surgically without causing paralysis or killing her. So they started her on chemotherapy. They went in to do a second surgery. And she was really nervous about the second surgery especially, and so she was laying in the room, and the doctors, they were all nice and things like that, but she was just really kind of agitated. And she said all of a sudden there was this one woman who she said was just really beautiful. She came over to her and she just held her hand, and she just calmed her and just kind of made everything seem a lot better. And then she became calm, and then the woman dropped her hand and she turned to look at the woman and there was nobody there. And later on, she said that I was convinced that God had sent an angel to me. Maybe it was the Blessed Mother, who knows. But she had made a conscious effort early on in this that she was going to suffer this and unite her suffering to the cross. She kept saying, Jesus says, if this is what you want, I want it too. And as she started chemotherapy and as her hair would fall out, she would take clumps of her hair and she would hold it up and she'd say, this is for you, Jesus. And it wasn't like in a mean way. She was just offering this up to unite her will to the Lord's. And people were just amazed at this, that she was doing this. And so she refused all forms of painkillers and morphine. And like I said, this was a very painful form of cancer, but she said she wanted to unite her suffering to the cross. And she said this later in life, or later on, because people were asking her why she did not want to take this. And she says, she refuses to take morphine. It reduces my lucidity. And she adds, there's only one thing I can do now to offer my suffering to Jesus, because I want to share as much as possible in his suffering on the cross. And so she was in the hospital at times, and she was getting treatments because the chemotherapy was really starting to wreck her body. And there would be times when she would be between treatments and she would get up and she would walk through the hospital and she would see other kids that were in the hospital, and she would go in and start talking to them and start comforting them. And there were some that were suffering from depression because of what they were going through with their cancer and with their different maladies. And she would just start talking to them and she would uplift them. And they always left feeling better. And it really took a toll on her because it was becoming painful for her to get up and move around, but she just felt this need to do this. And they would say, Chiara, you need to rest. And she said, there'll be time to rest later. I need to go talk to this one boy or this one girl that's really struggling right now. And she would just do it. And it was like she just could light up a room. Even through her suffering, she could just light up a room. She always had this really magnificent smile, and you'll see that in the pictures in the workbook. She just had this incredible smile. You can see that in the picture on the card that I gave you too. But her eyes were just always bright and shiny, and she was just this amazing presence to all that met her. But it became pretty evident later on that she wasn't going to get any better, and so this started in 1988. In 1989, in summer of '89, she had a point where she had like this hemorrhage, and so they thought she was going to die then. But she said at one point, I stopped praying for a cure. For a miracle cure, I started praying to unite my will as closely to the will of Christ as I could. And I mean, this is extraordinary because, I don't know hardly any adults that can do that, much less a 17 or 18-year-old person, which is, like she could be sitting here. She would be you guys' age. But people would come visit her, and they would go, all our friends would come over when she would be at home, and they'd say, we're going to go cheer her up. And they would leave very uplifted and realize that they weren't cheering her up, she was cheering them up. And people from all around were hearing about this girl. And there was this one cardinal, so like priest, bishop, cardinal, that was nearby, and he came to visit her, and he said, the light in your eyes is magnificent. Where does it come from? And she says, I just try and love Jesus as much as I possibly can. And so there wasn't anything extraordinary to what she was doing. It wasn't like she was spending hours in prayer or anything like that. I mean, she probably was through her suffering, and she was probably praying through it. But there were some nights where she was in so much pain. One morning, her parents came into her bedroom, and like the whole bedroom was just a mess because she had been thrashing around in bed so much because of the pain. But she said, things are better now. So it was just this real, she was really wrestling with this suffering. And at the beginning of this, she had, it wasn't like she just all of a sudden just accepted this. When she first came home, when the terminal diagnosis was really kind of, when she was accepting the terminal diagnosis, which they had kind of given her at the beginning, but she's like, no, I'm going to fight this. But at this one point in I think it was in early 1989, and she comes walking home from the doctor, which wasn't too far away. And she was really down, which was unusual for her. And she comes into the house and her mom says, what did they say? And she said, let's not speak now, let's not speak now. And she just kind of walked into her bedroom and she just kind of laid down on her bed and just with her coat on and everything and just laid there. And her mom just honored her request, knowing that there would be plenty of time to talk with her later. She said 25 minutes later, Chiara sat up. She was just bright and smiley. She was kind of back to her old self, and she says, okay, we can talk now. And what her mom said when she watched her, she could see that she was praying so intently. And it was almost like she was just wrestling with Jesus about this whole situation. Probably like, why am I going through this? Help me understand this, that type of thing. But what she said later is that during that time, she realized that Jesus needed her yes in order so that he could let his will be done through her. And so like Mary, when the angel came to her, Mary needed to say yes. Mary could have said no. Chiara needed to say yes. Chiara could have said no, but she didn't. She said, I want to align my will with Jesus' will. And so she kept going, and she kept refusing morphine, and they said, we need to manage your pain. And having seen that before, when my first wife, Angie, had terminal cancer, she was on a lot of morphine, and she didn't have the same type of cancer. But she had a little thing in her hand where she could hit it, and it would give her a dose of morphine, but it would only give her a certain amount. She could hit that button as often as she wanted, but it was only going to give her a certain amount, so they were hoping for a placebo effect. And the doctor leaned over to me one day and he said, you see that one dose of morphine that she just took, if we took it, it would kill us. Because morphine is such a powerful drug that once you start taking it, your body starts building up a tolerance and you have to take more and more. And so that's why they were hoping for the placebo effect with her hitting that trigger all the time. And so like I said, I can appreciate a little bit, not that I've gone through it, but I've witnessed it, what Chiara must have gone through with not taking morphine. Must just have been an incredible amount of courage for her to do that. It got to the point where, she was very accepting of her death, and she started planning her funeral with her friends. And they were planning the music and what she would wear. And she says, I want to be in a white dress because I'm going to meet my spouse, Jesus. And so I want my funeral to be a celebration, not sad. I want people to be singing. And when you're preparing me for burial, I want you to look at me and I want you to say, Chiara's seeing Jesus right now. And so she was tending to everybody else's needs. And that can be a really interesting thing. And that happened with my wife, Angie, too. She got to a point where about 6 to 8 weeks before her death, she became very accepting of it. And I think for her, I know it was after she received last rites, when the priest came to do that. But she was like, I know it's my time to go now. And, she told me, she says, I know that there's another woman out there with kids that they need a dad, and that's going to be your job. And so they wind up, in fact, it was funny because she was actually trying to pick out wives for me too. And I said, don't do that. That's not a good idea. And she was trying to pair me up with different, well, this friend of mine is single. You should, no. I did good once. I can do good the second time. But when they get to that point, they are like ministering to the people around them because they've accepted it. They know that we need to accept it as well. Okay. And it's really interesting to see them have that peace. And so Chiara, she again, people just come visit her, they go away uplifted. There was cards and letters pouring in from all over the place. People were hearing about her through this Focolare movement, but also through other places. The doctor said, they said, she showed us that there is no death, there is only life. And so it was just really interesting ways that she affected so many people. She died on October 7th, 1990. And so, like for me, I know where I was, when that was going on. My daughter had just been born. I had a 9-month-old daughter at the time. And so, I don't know why this, but for whatever reason, Chiara really affects me a lot whenever I study her and whenever I pray to her. I just have this closeness with her, which is just, I can't even describe it. Which goes to what I told some of you guys, when you pick your confirmation saint, that sometimes your saint picks you. And I really feel that's what happens with Chiara. But she died, and when she was getting ready to die, she kind of calls her mom over, and she's like, Mom, be happy because I am. And right before she died, her dad said, because the cancer had ravaged her body, there was very little of her organs that they could donate. But they said, we can donate your corneas if you want, and she just smiled. And again, if you see these pictures, you realize that her eyes were some of the most striking, one of her most striking features. And so it's really interesting that they were able to donate her corneas. But she dies on October 7th, which is the Feast of the Most Holy Rosary, which is curious. But her actual feast day, and she has one because she's a blessed, is October 29th. And so, like I said, there was thousands of people that showed up to her funeral. There was dozens and dozens of priests, and there was a couple bishops, I guess, and that cardinal. I mean, just at this teenager's funeral, because she just had this profound effect on people. But cards and letters are pouring in, and people wanted to come to her grave site. And what they do is they have, like, in that area, they have like these family vaults. And so it's like a small little building. You can walk inside it. On the walls are like places where they put the family members in the wall. And so people would come to this and they would just pray there. And, you could go there today and do that if you wanted to. But there just seemed to be this following. It's like she was gone, but people were still praying. And so in 1999, they opened her cause for canonization, which means that in the local diocese, they start, filling out, they start interviewing people, and they start, trying to put together examples from her life as to why she should be a saint, which, one of the things is to exhibit heroic virtue, which she obviously did, in the fact of how she spent her last 2 years dying. But also in things that she had written and things she had told people. So they just interviewed people, and they decided, yeah, there's reason for this case to be sent on. And so they send it on to the Vatican. And so once they do that, she's made servant of God. Once the Vatican says, yeah, this makes sense, we're going to go forward, she becomes what's called venerable. And then they start looking for miracles that may have been a direct cause for her. And the tribunal that does this, they only look for medical cures, because they're the only ones that you can really say, you can prove that it was a miracle. And so in, I think it was 2001 or 2002, there was a boy in another Italian city, and he suddenly was rushed to the hospital, and they diagnosed him with a severe form of meningitis. And he said the last time somebody had one this severe, they didn't even get him to the hospital before they died. And so they gave this kid 48 hours to live. And either somebody in the hospital or somebody in the hospital knew somebody who knew Chiara's mom and dad, and they called her and they said, go to her grave and pray now for this boy. Here's his name. And they did. And within a few hours, all of a sudden his vital signs turned around. I mean, there's nothing we could do. He's going to die in 2 days. And his vital signs turned around. Within a week or two, he was released from the hospital, perfectly cured. And I watched a documentary. They were interviewing the kid. It was pretty amazing. I mean, he was like a young adult by the time they did the documentary. And so they approved that miracle. And so she's got her first miracle. And so then she goes from venerable to blessed. And so now, that was in they approved that in 2009, and she was beatified in 2010. And there was a huge celebration. I mean, I don't remember what it said. There was tens of thousands of people that showed up to the beatification mass for her. And so she's sitting right now, kind of, she needs one more miracle, and then she becomes an actual canonized saint. She was the first person from Gen X that was beatified. Again, she died in 1990. So she's only been gone a little over 30 years. If she was alive today, she'd be about 52 years, 51, 52 years old. But in her life, she just exhibited so much fortitude with how to do things and left us such a great example of how to deal with things. And so, are any of us going to ever face that? Please God, no. But if we do, she's given us an example how to do it. But we can also take those same lessons and we can apply that to just our normal struggles, right? We get injured in our sport, or, we're struggling in school, or my grandma gets sick, or whatever. And we can take how she lived her life and say, okay, God, yeah, this stinks. Okay. I can either sit here and complain about it, or I can try and unite my will to yours and make something good happen from this. And that's what we want to do. And that doesn't she didn't just go, oh no, I've got cancer, I better get into my faith, right? She laid the groundwork for this when she was 9 and 10 years old. She actually was laying the groundwork for much earlier than that, but she really started practicing at 9 or 10 years old. And so that's the example I would give you guys, is that just find something in our faith and latch onto that and start to pray that prayer or do that devotion or whatever it is. Start reading the Bible, pick that one thing and just start doing it, because God takes that and then he will walk you to the next step of that. And keep saying what she would say. She kept saying, Jesus, if you want this, I want it too. And so when bad things happen, I found myself today even starting to do that more. I turned around and bumped into something, and normally I would have been like, rah, 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 probably needed to go to confession afterwards. But it's like I rammed into this thing, and it was like, okay, Jesus, if you want this, I want it too. And just little things like that, just take those little steps that help us on our way to holiness. And I think that's one of the reasons I really enjoy learning about these teenage saints, not the fact that they died young, right? Because, heaven forbid that any of us would die young. But if we do, or whenever we die, I just hope that we can live with the virtue that she lived with, and the faith in God that she had. And it just gives me so much hope knowing that, I like teaching about saints like this because it makes me realize that this level of holiness is possible for everybody sitting in this room. Okay, sometimes I think we talk about these saints. We got St. Anthony and St. Francis of Assisi and St. Catherine of Siena, and they did all these spectacular miracles, and Padre Pio, and he had the stigmata, and that's all great. But Chiara just lived her life and tried to unite her will to God. That was her secret sauce, is what she did. And that's the number one lesson I would say to you guys. It's just try and unite your will to whatever is going on. So when you're sitting here and you're in Mass, you're like, I don't know why I'm here. Say, Jesus, I don't know why I'm here. Help me understand why I need to be here. Or when something bad is going on, like my son, he broke his leg in early September of his senior year of soccer, playing soccer. So he missed out on most of his varsity year of soccer, right? Okay, Lord, help me with that, right? It was a good lesson for him, right? Because he learned to enjoy the sport even more later on in life. But, Lord, help me unite my will to yours. Help me see the good in this, or help me make something good come from something bad. And that's what we want to do, right? Because again, if Chiara would have just been like, oh, woe is me, and life sucks, and all this kind of stuff, we wouldn't be talking about her right now. Okay, we wouldn't be able to take any lessons from her life. But the fact is that we can take some lessons from her life. And I would just encourage you guys to just, like I said, find that one thing that in the faith that you can grab onto and start doing it, so that you can start uniting your will to God's will. And so the grace of this mystery is spiritual courage. And if you think about Chiara, I mean, it definitely took spiritual courage to do what she did. I mean, it took all sorts of courage, but she couldn't have done that without God. Us just even thinking about it, I don't know about you guys, but me just thinking about doing that, there's no way I could do that apart from God. There's other stuff that goes on in our lives that, I think sometimes, I know I do it, is I try and do it my way, and I try a whole bunch of different things, and then I go, well, I've tried everything else, I might as well pray. And, I wind up praying last instead of praying first. And that's one of the habits we got to get into is trying to include God early on, and that's what Chiara did. It's not that she didn't struggle. I mean, remember the time when she was, going to give up her toys when she was 4, and the time when she was struggling with, the terminal diagnosis, and she struggled with the Lord. But she just, she did that through prayer, and that spiritual courage is it's amazing. And then, so sort of like the Transfiguration, right? Jesus comes and he wants to comfort the apostles because he has just told them before this that, he starts telling them, I'm going to be killed. When it said after 8 days, well, what happened 8 days earlier is when we were at Caesarea Philippi, and he said, I'm going to be killed, and we're going to go to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be tortured and crucified and all this kind of stuff. And so you can tell the apostles are probably pretty worried about that. And so he takes them up on the mountain, and he shows them what his glorified body is going to look like. And he shows them there is life after death because they see Moses and Elijah. And so he's trying to comfort them, trying to give them spiritual courage because he knows what they're about to endure. And that's what Chiara was doing too. She was knowing that her friends were going to miss her, right? But the Lord gave her the courage to persevere and then almost to minister to them. And so it's a really great grace what she was given. There was a point where, like, her dad, Chiara's dad, was like, people come in and she's smiling and things like that. I bet you once they leave, she's probably in there suffering. Well, so he was looking through the keyhole one day. She was in there by herself, and she was the same. She was just smiling, and she was radiant, and she was praying to heaven, and she was just the same. So it wasn't that she was just putting on this act. This was who she had become. And so that can only happen through God. So again, that prayer, I can't say it now. I even have a sticker on my coffee mug that says, Jesus, if you want it, I want it too. Get in the habit of saying that because there's a lot of power in that prayer.